Welcome to Biochemistry, Chem 4375. There are a couple of things that I want to go ahead and address right off the bat. For starters, I'm Dr. Gray. You're welcome to call me Joel. You're welcome to call me Dr. Gray. Um, I will probably respond to every email with a salutation, sincerely regards, whatever, Dr. Gray, but that's more than muscle memory than anything else. If you want to call me Joel, you're more than welcome to. If you want to call me Dr. Gray, you're more than welcome to. And just so anyone is curious, this is not like an effort to be like, hey, I'm the cool professor. I know I am. So we'll just go ahead and clear that up right off the bat. Um, it's instead just, I don't know, I don't really. Yeah, just call me by my name. I have a name. So with that in mind, this is biochemistry. This is Chem 4375. If you're taking this class, the one thing that means is that you are not a biochemistry major. If you are a biochemistry major, maybe you transferred in and you thought, oh, well, I'm done with my organics. I got to jump into a biochemistry class. This is not the class intended for you. If you're a biochemistry major, then you probably want to talk to your academic advisor as soon as you can. And chances are you want to get into Chem 3375, so 3375. Um, and I believe Dr. Wendy David is teaching that class. She's a great instructor. So um, there we go with that. Now, a couple of other things. This is a 100% online class. That means that our exams will be administered online. Any quizzes will be administered online. Anytime that you meet with me, it will be online. Chances are it will be Zoom until something radical changes and Texas State switches to Google. I don't think that's even remotely within the cards, but we're going to be using Zoom as far as I'm aware moving forward. Second thing, this class is at 6:30 in the evening on Mondays and Wednesdays. Um, and that is one thing that I believe this is considered a atypical class time. Um, and the reason that I mentioned that as like this is an atypical class time is because the share my screen, the final exam schedule. So when do we actually have the final exam? Well, if you do Google search for TX State final exam schedule, it'll take you to the registrar's homepage. And then this will give you an option, spring 2025, and Monday, Wednesday, 6:30 to 7:50. Oh, okay, we're not in non-standard. I apologize. But what that means is that our final exam will be administered on April 30th. That's Wednesday, April 30th, from 8 until 10:30 p.m. Um, that's when we're going to do our final. Now, with that said, I'm going to stop my share. Um, so that's one thing to go ahead and, mark on your calendar right now. Now, with, let's see, some other things. Since this is a class that's administered online, and your exams are going to be administered online, we're going to be using Canvas quizzes for our exams. And with that, we're also going to be we're going to be using Proctorio. I'm not sure if anyone's had experience with Proctorio. Um, can we let's go with like an indication with like a thumbs up emoji if you have used Proctorio before. And just so we're on the same page, the thumbs up is not like it was wonderful. That's instead just like, yes, I use it. Okay. So Proctorio is something that from my experience using it, it can be, let's see. The word I'm thinking of starts with an A and ends with annoying. And what I mean by that is Proctorio is sensitive, and the way that its sensitivity can kind of show up is if you have a pop-up blocker, if you have an outdated version of Chrome or Firefox or Safari, um, if you have an outdated version of Mac OS, I can't remember all the names of the different Mac OSs, but if your operating system is old and Proctorio says, nope, I don't want to work with that, um, you will be prompted with, hey, you need to enter an access code. And just so you guys know, I will never be giving you an access code. And that's not because I'm elaborately trying to figure out how can I give an exam and then not let anyone take it. But rather, Proctorio enters the access code. And so if you're prompted for, hey, what's the access code? That means Proctorio couldn't start. And so that's one of the ways in which Proctorio can be very frustrating and very annoying. Um, Now, in order to avoid that problem from becoming a big problem, what we're going to do is we're going to, and what I'm going to post is I'm going to post your first opportunity for bonus points and extra credit. And that is I'm going to post a quiz tonight that will be a Proctorio practice quiz. Basically, it's a way of confirming that you have a setup that you're going to use to take exams in this class that Proctorio is compliant with. So you're going to have a total of 999 attempts on this Proctorio quiz. I'm going to open it tonight, and then I'm going to close it on Sunday night. And if you complete it by Sunday night, then great. You're going to get 2 bonus points on your final exam. Now, in the event, so I'm then going to have a second version of that same quiz open up after Sunday and stay up for the rest of the semester so that before you take any of your exams, you can confirm Proctorio works. My reasoning being that, some point during the course of the semester, you might spill coffee on your computer, in which case you got to get a new one. Or you go to Best Buy and you're like, hey, Geek Squad, the computer broke. I don't know how. It couldn't be that coffee that spilled on it. I have no clue. I think that it came like this. So you guys got to get me a new one. And usually they're going to say, whatever, man. And they're going to comply and get you that new computer. Well, fingers crossed, hopefully. Um, but that's going to be up so that you can, if anything about your tech setup changes over the course of the semester, you can confirm that it's still good to go with Proctorio. So your first kind of assignment exercise this semester is Proctorio. You have this practice quiz that will go up tonight. It will be up until Sunday night at 11 p.m. Okay, now it's an online class. Anytime you want to meet with me, I've got some designated office hours, and so that brings up my next item that I want to share. Now, share. Okay. So, Chem 4375, Spring 2025. This is our syllabus. I'm going to post it on our Canvas page later tonight. Monday and Wednesday, 6:30 to 7:50 through Zoom. Here's the meeting ID, the passcode, and all that. I've got office hours also. Those office hours, just so that we can, whenever it comes to office hours, I have a very, I would say, a very fluid philosophy. And that is, if you want to meet with me, set up a time. That's something that for some folks, it's like, wait, that's too general. That's too broad. I can't make a decision. And for those people who are like, I need a concrete time that I can meet with you, here it is. Between 12:30 and 1:30 on Mondays and Wednesdays, I will be available on that link. Um, if you have a class during that time, that's fine. And not like disrespectfully, whatever, don't want to talk to you. That's fine in the sense that you just send me an email and say, hey, I'm not going to be able to make your regular office hours. Can you meet on Tuesday at 2 p.m.? In which case I'll say, yeah, sure thing. Um, so I'm trying to like address both populations, the people who need structure and the people who are like, I can do without structure. So that's kind of my purpose there. So I want to be available. And I want you guys to feel comfortable contacting me when you need some help. Um, okay. Now, next up, textbook. We do not have a grounded textbook, and the reason for that is I'm going to be using a number of different sources. And basically everything that we talk about in this class is going to be rooted in if anyone's familiar with LibreText, um, or LibreChem, I think that it's LibreText. LIBRE. These are considered OERs or open educational resources. So these are free for you to access. And the reason that I'm using different sources, different LibreTexts, is because what I want to do when we're learning from this and learning in this class is I want to try to ground as much of this content in things that you've seen before. So I want you to not look at biochemistry as some abstract new thing you've never heard of, but instead I want you to look at biochemistry as, oh, I see. I'm familiar with pH. I understand the pH scale. I understand pKa's. I understand strong acids and weak acids. And because I understand that, oh, now all of a sudden I understand how an amino acid is protonated or deprotonated depending on the environment. Now, in that same vein, if topics from Gen Chem 1 and Gen Chem 2 and organic are things that you're like, oh man, I really kind of struggled with that. Well, we're going to bring them back and not in like a punitive way, but we're going to bring them back in a way that's like, you've at least seen this. Maybe you struggled with it, but now let's kind of shore up your understanding of it. Let's enhance your understanding of it, and let's learn it. Let's enhance our understanding of that with biochemistry. So that's why I have this kind of various sources provided as links on Canvas page as needed. Um, if if you're someone who says, oh, well, I need a textbook, I need something, well, then I'm going to add this item here, and I would say fundamentals of of biochemistry, Voet. I'll say, yeah, Voet, and Pratt. And I think the most recent edition is the fifth edition. That's a textbook that I like. Um, but everything that we're going to be looking at, I'll have references either from that or a number of different LibreTexts. In addition to this, I'll also be using Biochemistry Free for All. And the authors of Biochemistry Free for All are Ahern, Rajagopal, and Han. This that Biochemistry Free for All is one of the LibreTexts that's specifically for biochemistry. But like I said, I'm going to be pulling things from LibreText and OpenStax textbooks that are Gen Chem 1, Gen Chem 2, just because I want you guys to be comfortable and familiar with that. Um, and Biochemistry Free for All, that's provided by Oregon State University. Um, and I I gotta be honest with you, every time I read Free for All, I in my mind, it takes me back to whenever I was in eighth grade and this computer game called StarCraft came out. And me and my friends would play what were called free for alls or FFAs, where everyone's on our own team and fights. So anytime I get to reference biochemistry FFA, there's a part of my heart that glows a little bit. So Thank you for letting me do that. And if you haven't played StarCraft from 1998, it's available. It's available. Okay, course objectives to gain insight into the chemical foundations and basis of biological molecules. That's my one sentence synopsis. If you look in the course catalog, you'll see this course provides a challenging introduction to biochemistry, covering the structure and function of nucleic acids, proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Major metabolic pathways of carbohydrates and lipids are also examined. This course is not intended for biochemistry majors. Okay, so this element or this part of the statement right here is a really important one. I know that in this class, there's typically people who are planning on pursuing medical school, PA school, vet school, and on the MCAT, if you're planning on going to medical school, there's going to be lots of questions about metabolic pathways. And that's part of the content that we'll cover in this class. And that's something that has been added in recent years just to kind of help out. In addition to that, to me, learning biochemistry and not learning metabolic pathways is kind of like if you take a foreign language class and you learn how to conjugate a verb, but you can't read a sentence. It's like, why did I do all of that exercise? So that's what we're going to try to do. That's what we're going to do, not try to do it. That's what we're going to do. Now, the other part about this is nucleic acids, proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Those are your major those are your major macromolecules. Those are the important ones, whether they're carrying and transmitting genetic information, carrying out a function, and catalyzing a reaction, or providing insulation or providing a huge amount of energy like lipids and carbohydrates. So we're going to get into all of those this semester, and I hope that you're looking forward to that. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is grading for this course. Quizzes. Okay, I call them quizzes, but they're really kind of more like I guess they're almost more of it's almost just like a homework assignment. And whenever I say that, I mean they're open book, open item. The only thing that I do not want you to use is AI. I don't want you to use ChatGPT or Gemini or college tools or any browser extensions to answer these questions. Um, your quizzes are going to be worth a grand total of 20% of your grade. Each week, you're going to be given assigned three of them, and they will all be due Sundays at 11 p.m., and they're on Canvas. At 11 p.m., that's when the time closes. If you finished one of them, I'm sorry that you missed the other two. You're going to have two attempts at each one of these quizzes. So when you take a quiz, you'll be able to look at the score that you got, but it's important that you kind of take notes. Like when you take notes about what those quizzes are or what those answers that you input, you're going to have a second attempt at that quiz. So make sure that you say, okay, question number one, I marked A, 2, B, 3, C. Okay, now I see that I got two of those questions right. I'm going to look back and, look at my notes. Okay, well, looks like, I think it's question number one that I got wrong. Okay, so next time I do that one, because I'm seeing the same question, I'm going to try something different as my answer. So quizzes, you have two attempts at all of them. It's worth 20% of your grade. There's three per week. What that means is that I think it's like 15 or 16 weeks, you'll get about 45 of those quizzes. They're going to be made available on Monday evenings, and then they close on Sundays at 11 p.m. I'm not going to assign them over spring break. If anyone is disappointed to hear that, I apologize. Then next up, activities. You're going to be given at least two of these assignments per week, and they account for 10% of your grade. They are due on Sundays at 11 p.m., and they can be submitted or they will be accepted late, and they're going to get about 10% deduction per day for up to 3 days, and then after that, they're not going to be accepted. Now, these activities, I'm expecting them to be like, you know, they're genuinely something to kind of mix things up. And, it's going to be like crossword puzzle or something like that, where your clue is here's the structure of a molecule, what's the name? And, 7 across is the structure of tryptophan. So you'd put in tryptophan as the name. And then sometimes there will be just general clues. Okay, next, you got regular exams. And then we've got our final exam. Each of your exams are worth 15%. So 3 regular exams, 45%, plus your final, which is 15%. Participation is going to be evaluated and gauged by Zoom polling, as well as Canvas discussion and or office hours. And the reason for the Canvas discussion, or just so this kind of feeds into my I guess philosophy or view of attendance. So attendance, I'm expecting that you're going to be here and participate in every class meeting. Um, I am, however, going to record every Zoom meeting and post it on my YouTube channel and then subsequently post those links onto our Canvas page. So what that means is the recording that we're making tonight, famous last words, am I actually recording it? Yes, I am. Good. I'm always nervous that I'm not going to record it or I'm going to forget to. Um, that's going to be up all semester long. If I did just because I'm posting it on my YouTube channel. If I did just the Zoom recordings are good for a week and then they get purged. Now, with that in mind, there are certainly some instances where you might say, hey, you know what? I can't make it to class this week because I was working this afternoon and then, so and so didn't show up, so I got to make it to, I got to stay at work. Um, I don't like and I don't believe in being the person who says, too bad, so sad, in part because that makes me sound like I'm a 6-year old. But also it's just like insensitive and cold because, as we all know, 6-year-olds are insensitive and cold people. Not really, but that's kind of, anyway. Um, so I don't want to do that. And I'm not going to do that. Um, in addition to that, I know that there are probably some folks who, they've got to, um, anyway, my point is circumstances prevent complete attendance. I understand and respect that. Um, I'm posting all the recordings so you have a mechanism to review what we do. And I'm not going to say, oh, well, that means you're out 10% if you can't make it to class. Well, I'm going to be looking at Zoom polling, but then I'll also have Canvas discussion points. And so those can kind of substitute for one another. Or, sorry, let me rephrase that so there's clarity. Those can substitute for one another. What I mean by that is I'm going to have my Zoom polls, and if you attend the Zoom meetings, I'm going to have a kind of criteria like, hey, you answered 3 questions, we had 4, okay, that means that you're going to get full points for that day. Um, so then there would be a similar opportunity for someone who can't attend or does not attend class to participate in a Canvas discussion, in which case I'll post a prompt and I'll say, basically just post a general prompt and say, come up with 3 explanations for this. And if you contribute to that, that would be your way of gaining those participation points. It's going to be a kind of binary situation where it's like you respond or you don't respond. If I'm expecting everyone to be doing that kind of with honesty, earnesty, and sincerity. If I post a prompt that is draw a picture of an amino acid with a hypothetical amino acid with 3 carboxyl groups on its R group, and then somebody draws a picture of like, I don't know, a hot dog, you're not going to get credit for that. I mean, yeah, you engaged in it, but you didn't really do the thing. So I do have a threshold where I'm going to say that's not an adequate contribution. Um, but what I want you to take away from this is that if you are unable to make it to class, there will be a mechanism for you to gain those participation points. Um, in addition to that, whenever I have Zoom poll questions, um, they might be multiple choice questions where I say, hey, what is the answer to this? And there will be a correct answer. Am I going to say, oh, well, you got the answer wrong, so you don't get your participation? No, that's not the point. The point is to participate, not to get it correct. So, in addition to that, I, I really like whenever I have a Zoom poll, I want you to take a chance. And I want you to say, like, oh, I think this is the answer. And I'm also going to have the answer option of, I have no clue, so I am selecting this answer option. So if you don't know, say, I don't know, rather than, oh, it's B. I mean, I want you to kind of contribute with, your best foot forward and everything like that. Okay. Now, what I've gone over is kind of some of the logistics of the class, when to meet with me, when we will meet on a regular basis, resources that we'll use, the breakdown of the grading. Does anyone have any questions at this point in time? You're welcome to add it to the chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak. I'll pause for a minute and take a drink of water.
I did have a question.
Go for it.
So for the discussions, is that only something that you do if you did, or you only have to do if you missed the meeting or?
So that sounds like a great question. And if I understand correctly, I hope that I do. If you engage in the Zoom poll, are you like banished from participating in the Canvas discussion? No, not at all. That's something that absolutely drop your thoughts. Like I'll post the prompt, and if you're like, oh, interesting, I think that it's this, then by all means contribute. Did I understand your question properly?
I mean, kind of, yeah. So, like, pretty much, it's not mandatory though. If you did attend the Zoom meeting, you're not also expected to do the discussion, but you can.
Yeah, correct. So you'll gain those points by, or you'll gain that contribution by the Zoom poll. But if you miss the Zoom poll, then you kind of come back from that with the discussion. And then I have a separate private message in the chat that reads, for quizzes, is it the highest score of both attempts or the most recent attempt that's kept? It's the highest score. So that's why you get the two chances. Take notes whenever you're doing your first one. They are timed. I just said, just because I don't want somebody to accidentally leave it open for like 26,000 minutes. So they are timed. So you have like, I think I've always done 15 minutes because they're like 4 or 5 questions. Um, and take notes whenever you take it, mark your answers. You will not get the response of, hey, you got this, or question number one you got wrong, question number two you got right. You will not get that direct feedback. Instead, you can take screenshots of the questions, you can do all of that, and then take a look at your notes whenever you're answering them. And like I said, they're open answer, or they're open. Just no Gemini, ChatGPT, college tools, and anything else that is like homework helpers. Okay. For exam preparation, should we mainly rely on the textbook, or are exams based on what we discuss in lecture, or an even split? How do you advise we prepare for the exams? That is a fantastic question. The way that I recommend that you prepare for exams is, in the coming days, I will be posting kind of study guides for each of the exams. So you'll have access to those. And in terms of, if you wanted one hard source, what should I go to? I would say the lectures. Um, just because the textbooks might go into, or some of the textbook content might go into more depth and more detail than is truly necessary. Um, and so you kind of might run off in a tangent if you follow the book. But I'll be posting like learning objectives before each one of the exams, so you'll have access to those, and you'll have a good idea of like what the coverage of all the content is. And I can also um, migrate over some old exams. so you can have access to those. Okay. Now, are there any other questions? Okay. Now, the next thing that I wanted to talk about, um, and I am going to share a new document for this. Um, mhm. Okay, so I gotta switch my share, and here we go. Um, Whenever I'm teaching, I always like to use, I've got a stylus and a little tablet here. That's how I like to kind of operate and teach and everything like that. So from time to time, I'll pull up a blank slide like this, and we'll go from here. Now, what I want to discuss here and go over are the exams. So the display in the gradebook that I have is going to be a little bit different from yours. Um, in the basically the way that it's going to look for me, and anytime you want to see this, please don't hesitate to contact me. We can jump on a Zoom together and I'll show this to you. But basically, what I'll have is category one, cat two, cat three, and the final. And these different categories or folders, whatever you want to call them, will have a couple of different items in them. First of all, they will have exam one, exam two, exam three, and the final, and the scores that you make on each of these. What I'm going to do and what I will do is use what I think is a student-centered progressive um, grading style. And each one of these categories is going to be weighted 15%. I'm calling them categories because it gets confusing whenever I say, oh, well, this is actually your exam one grade and this is your exam one grade. It just gets kind of hairy. So I'm going to go with categories one, two, three, and final. Now, exam one is going to be our first block of material, which I will refer to as module one. Okay. Now, exam number two, whenever you start or whenever you take that exam, that will actually be kind of an accumulation of everything that we've covered to date. And what that means is exam number two will be about 30% module one and about 70% module two. So you can kind of look at that as 30% old stuff, 70% new stuff. Okay. Then exam number three is going to follow that similar suit, but it's going to be 30% module two stuff, the older stuff, doesn't have the oldest, but the older stuff, and then 70% module three. Now, using these terms, M1, M2, M3, go ahead and add to the chat. What do you think is going to be on the final exam? About, yep, it's M1, M2, and M3. And I appreciate some people added 30%, other people added 33%. You're absolutely right. It's an even split of all of the material. The final exam is cumulative. Okay. So let's say, hypothetically, you take exam number one on I think it's February 19th. I can't remember exactly. I think it's the 19th. Let's say that you take that exam and you get a 50. And I'm not dooming anyone to that, but I'm just giving hypothetical numbers. Then let's say that when exam two rolls around, which I think is April 2nd, you get sick and you're just sick. I don't have to be graphic and say what's happening or anything like that. You're just sick. You don't make it. You take that, or you do not take that exam, you email me, you're like, I can't even open my computer, but I'm writing this email. This is going to sound cold and blunt of me, but I'm going to say, I'm sorry. I don't do late exams, or I don't do makeup exams. And then for exam number three, let's say that for that one, you're all ready, and then you run into computer problems throughout the course of the day. That's super frustrating. And I've had that happen before, and it stinks and it's frustrating. But in that case, let's say your computer problems get worked out, but you have a limited amount of time. And let's say that you get a 60. 60. A tablet. Don't fail me now, tablet. It's just talking about how I use a tablet. There we go. You get a 60. If you have those grades, at that point in time, going into the final, you're looking at that and you're like, oh, this is not good. And I'm not too pumped about this. But when you take that final exam, effectively, your final exam can replace all of those grades. The reason being is because in this first category, this Cat 1, it's got your exam 1 grade. That's also going to have your exam 2 grade. Now, a fair question for that is why? Does anyone have a thought as to why? Add it to the chat or unmute yourself and say it. Exactly. Because you are being asked about Module 1 or Exam 1 material. Okay? So now let's use these set of grades here, and I'll put these in. You've got, well, you got a 0 here. And then let's go ahead and use Exam 3. Will also be found, the grade that you earn on exam number 3 is also going to be found in category 2. It's a 60. Okay? Then for category 3, well, there's not a fourth exam, but there is another place that you're going to see that exam 3 stuff or that module 3 stuff, and that's on the final. The last place that you're going to see the module 1 stuff is also on the final. The last stuff that you're going to see the module 2 stuff is on the final. So the final itself is worth 15% of your grade. But in this particular case, let's say that this person says, you know what? I'm going to make sure that I do absolutely fantastic on the final. And, even though I got sick before exam 2, and then even though I had computer issues on exam 3, I've been studying. I know this stuff. I'm ready for it. And let's say that that person gets a 92. That's a solid grade right there. Now, what I am not doing is I'm not taking the exam grades and averaging. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm looking at your final exam as when you are asked about Module 1, Module 2, and Module 3 stuff, what was your comprehension and mastery and understanding of that material? Well, it was 92%. You effectively, for all intents and purposes, understood 92% of that material. And so, what I'm going to do is for category 1, category 2, I'm going to set a rule. And that rule is going to be the same. And that rule is going to drop the 2 lowest grades in that category. So what that means is exam 1 and exam 2 grades are going to be dropped. Exam 2 and exam 3 are going to be dropped. Then for category 3, the rule will be effectively the same, but a little different. The only difference is that it's going to drop 1 grade as opposed to 2 because there's only 1 grade to drop. Now, a fair question is, well, how does it select which grades? It drops the lowest. So now let's just provide another kind of counter to that. If instead, let's say your grade breakdown looks like this. Let's say on exam number one, you get a 100. Exam number two, you get a 100. Exam number three, you get a 100. And then the final exam, you get a 12. Okay. Well, I'm going to use these numbers. 100 goes to E2, 100 goes to E3. Then the 12 that was gotten on the final ends up here, here, and here. The rule is applied. Well, it's going to drop two of the lowest grades. The two 100s are effectively identical, so it doesn't really matter which one it drops. It's just going to drop one of them. It's going to drop that. It's going to drop the 12. That, that, and it's going to drop that. Now, a fair question, and a question that people always have is it's very common for people to look at this grading scheme and say, oh, okay, so the final really can only bring your grade up. That is not correct. The final can absolutely bring your grade up, but the final itself is worth 15% of your grade. So if you come into the final exam and say, I'm going to go AC/DC down the whole thing and see how it works out. If you get a bad grade on the final, will that, and I'll ask this, will a final grade of 0 bring the grades of categories 1, 2, or 3 down? If you skip the final, it will not. The final cannot hurt these. Sorry. It cannot hurt those. Can a 0 on the final negatively impact your grade? Absolutely. Because the final itself is still worth 15% of your grade. Okay. So that's one thing that is worth knowing and worth understanding. The final can have a huge positive impact on you because it can bring so many grades up. But it can also, I mean, it's still worth its own weight. So it can bring part of your grade down. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up if that makes sense? Okay, thumbs up, thumbs up. Yep, good. And if at any point this semester you want to meet with me and say, hey, I I have a decent understanding of this, but I'd like to see it applied to my grades. Absolutely. I have no problem doing that. The reason is because um, I know that Canvas provides you a tool where it's like a scenario where it's like, what if you got this or what if you got this? It doesn't really account for a more, I guess, complicated grading style like this. And I'm not saying that like, oh, I'm so advanced, Canvas hadn't thought about someone with my brain, but that's just how it works. Okay. So then I think that's the last thing that I really wanted to talk about with that. Um, now, would you say the exams are relatively challenging, either the category? That's a great question. So, question poses, would you say the exams are relatively challenging? Um, I would say yes. I don't think that they're like easy. Mostly the questions are multiple choice. There will be some multiple select questions. And those multiple select questions are a little bit by nature more challenging than multiple choice questions. So I would say that that does kind of like elevate the difficulty. Um, but with that said, I don't think that the final exams, or sorry, any of the exams, I don't think that I don't really have questions that are intentionally there to be like, you think it's this, but the devil's in the details and it's actually this. I don't do a lot of those questions. I like to think that I'm pretty straightforward with the questions that I'm asking and relating your learning objectives to the material that you're asked about. I try to do that as best as I can. I'm I'm sure that I have room for improvement, but that's kind of where I am. Okay. So for are there any other questions? Okay. Um, Kind of the last thing that I wanted to talk about was I wanted to basically show you, you know, kind of a we're going to jump into amino acid structures on Wednesday. Um, I wanted to give you a little bit of a reminder of some things related to organic chemistry and functional groups, because the like this right here, this first link is from the biochemistry free-for-all text, basic chemistry overview. Read through this because this is going to have lots of important information, and try to remember and jog your memory of what am I looking for? Things like electronegativity and um, different sorts of interactions. Um, what we will talk about, and as the course proceeds, is we will get into. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Um, we will get into these different functional groups, and these functional groups are going to be pretty darn important. But what's important about them is how they can change. So, for example, um, one functional group that we will see a lot of is phosphoric acid. Ugh, phosphoric acid. Sorry. Um, and phosphoric acid, if you remember from Gen Chem 1, H3PO4. Phosphoric acid is going to be a triprotic acid. And what that means is that it's going to progress from H3PO4 to H2PO4 minus to HPO4 2 minus, and then all the way down to PO4 3 minus. One of the things that we'll talk about quite a bit in this class are charges and pH, how environmental conditions can impact what a molecule looks like. Does it have a positive 2 charge? Does it have a minus 3 charge? And what's happening there? Um, if you like this double arrow, what does that mean? Well, that means that that's at equilibrium. So, what I think is a really important thing for you to kind of remember is if you think about a titration curve. A titration curve, and I mean, am I one of the most talented artists of our generation? Yeah, I am. Am I too humble? A little bit. But, I mean, look at this. That right there is a titration curve. And one of the things that's super important about a titration curve is just a second. There we go. Is kind of the nuts and bolts of a titration curve. We've got this right here, this point in the middle. That corresponds to a pKa. And let's just go ahead and we'll use model. And I got to be honest with you, whenever I was a student taking Gen Chem 2 and you said HA is an acid, and maybe this is just like how my brain works. Um, I remember always being like, yeah, but what acid? I need to know. And then my professor or my teacher would be like, well, it's a weak acid. I'd be like, okay, I don't know why we're getting personal about this, but again, which one? And then they'd be like, Joel, you don't understand. And I would be like, I know. That's this is really driving me crazy. And they'd be like, I There would just be lots of sighing. But HA, there's our model acid. That's a protonated molecule. That molecule will kind of oscillate or go back and forth between HA and A minus. So the protonated form and the deprotonated form. Now let's say that we had a pKa, or on our y-axis of this titration curve, let's say that this was 3.1. Now we have on our y-axis, our pH is measured. Our x-axis is basically percentages protonated. What of this molecule, what percentage of this molecule is protonated if we're right here? Or what about if we're right here? Most importantly, though, if we're right here, what percentage of our molecule, what do we have? More HA or A if we are right here? Well, if we're right there, we've got 50% HA and 50% A. Now, this is the sort of thing that I alluded to earlier, in the sense that you know this from Gen Chem 2. Maybe this was a concept or an idea that you struggled with, or maybe this was something that you're like, oh, I've got that fact. But if we are to go instead over to this spot, what are our percentages? Well, if we're right here, if where I have this circled X, where does that correspond to a pH? Well, chances are the pH that we're looking at there is, let's call it, for the sake of simplicity, let's call it 2.9. That 2.9, what does that mean about, if our pH is 2.9, that means we have an acidic environment. If we have an acidic environment, what do we have a lot of? We have a lot of H pluses, a lot of protons. And so what that means is, just to give us like nice round numbers, we're going to say that about 70% of our molecule looks like HA, and then about 30% of it looks like A minus. They're both present, but we have a greater abundance of one of them than the other. And then if we are to go over here, where I put the X in a box there, well, then our numbers invert. Then we're at about, I'm going to switch my color here, 30%. I'm going to draw red around my box so that, yeah, there we go. About 30% is HA, and about 70% is A minus. So understanding that, understanding like solution chemistry is super important for this class, because when we talk about titration curves, when we talk about protonation and deprotonation, we're not talking about acetic acid and what's the percentage of our protonated or deprotonated acetate or acetic acid. Instead, we're looking at a molecule. We're looking at a protein. We're saying, okay, when the pH is 4.6, this protein that has 165 amino acids, how many of them are protonated? How many of them are deprotonated? What does that mean for the overall charge? What does that mean for the function of that molecule? Can that molecule catalyze its reaction? Does that protein fold in a completely different way? So that's all important to think about with respect to that. Solution chemistry is important to think about with respect to our functional groups. If you have a carboxylic acid, what are the possible charges of a carboxylic acid? It can be neutral or it can be -1. Is a carboxylic acid ever going to have a +1 charge? Nope. So thinking back to organic and knowing about your functional groups and what are the possible charges, those are some of the important things to consider for this. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. I'm going to stop my recording. I'm also going to stop my share.